Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Williamstown. I'm Christopher Hoyer. I'm the acting director of the Research and Academic Program here at the Clark, and also faculty in the Williams grad program. And on behalf of my co-convener, Professor Rebecca Zorak of Northwestern, I'd like to welcome you to this gathering. Rebecca and I will say more substantive things about the gathering's aims and scope tomorrow morning. But tonight I want to briefly summarize some of our aims and goals before I get to our main event. Now, art history has been engaged with issues of the environment for centuries. The romance and the rejection of nature are in many ways at the heart of the discipline. But the speed of recent ecological change has reframed many assumptions about the discourses and practices of culture's various figures and various grounds. As the scholar Yates McKee has put it, quote, "What becomes of art history when the natural world of the scientists and the records of the humanities can no longer be separated? When the very nature that would become an object of cultural representation is marked by in advance by the economic, political, and technological dynamics of human history," end quote. Now, art history may seem to have come late to the eco-critical turn, but it is perhaps because it was, in some sense, already there. We come to this topic with a conviction that art and art history have distinctive contributions to make, and how we come to terms with the ecological crisis and the ecological imagination. Now, over the next 3 days, we will pose ecology as a potential method as well as a theme, which may or may not pivot upon ideas of nature. Our subjects include literal convergences of art and earth, rhetorical discourses of environmental interconnectedness or estrangement, performative land-body situations, and social ecologies like environmental racism, the social politics of resource extraction, legislative art, and the ecosystem of the art world. Above all, our speakers will rethink art and ecology in material, practical terms, looking for alternatives to tropes of landscape and place. There's no shortage of recent practice seeking alternatives to the eco-spiritualism that often characterizes writing on the art-environment nexus. Our intention here is to think rigorously about the material and theoretical potential for new kinds of cultural histories. That is why I'm thrilled, therefore, to be able to introduce Ghana Think Tank. Ghana Think Tank are an artist collective known for their unconventional approach to negotiating social conflicts, as we'll soon hear. Using a blend of public art and community organizing, they have been, as they put it, developing the first world since 2006. They collect problems in the developed world and send them to think tanks they establish in places like Cuba, Ghana, Palestine, Iran, and in one case, a group of incarcerated teenage girls in the United States. These individual tanks work to solve the problems. Ghana Think Tank then works with communities to implement solutions, whether they seem impractical or brilliant. Since last autumn, Ghana Think Tank has been working with the Williams College Museum of Art here on a year-long initiative focusing upon climate change. They began by working with an action team of Williams students and faculty, asking residents in Williamstown environment the following question, quote, "How does climate change affect you?" The problems were then sent to think tanks in Indonesia and Morocco, countries already grappling with the impacts of climate change, who provided solutions and then journeyed to the United States to help implement these ideas. We'll hear from Ghana Think Tank twice over the next days, and we do have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of today. But again, enough with me. Please welcome and join me in listening to Ghana Think Tank.
Thanks so much, Chris, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you so much to all of you for being here. Thanks. Clicker. My name is Carmen Montoya. This is Christopher Robbins, and the third core member of the Ghana Think Tank, John Ewing, couldn't be here today. The mission of the Ghana Think Tank, as Chris mentioned, is to develop the first world. Each of us, Christopher, myself, and John, all worked on what I'll call the fringes of international development. And we saw how the wrong solutions to the wrong problems, even with the best intentions, can sometimes cause more harm than good. The project started as a response to the hubris and paternalism of the standard Western development model, which posits West is best, white is right. And we wanted to see if there was some way to respond to that, to kind of try to flip that power dynamic, but in an art context. So we set up a very simple dichotomy, powerful and powerless, first world, third world. Then we ask, what I'll say is maybe the man, to give us problems about what it's like to exist in their world. And we ask the, what I'll say, the underdog, to solve those problems. And asking someone for help immediately raises them to the level of resources and acknowledges that they can make an important contribution as well. As the exchange develops, the stereotypes, both positive and negative, are revealed, and these simple dichotomies, self and other, powerful and powerless, begin to break down and allow us to get to something else. We start by collecting problems in the so-called first world. Here you can see us, that's John over there, getting ready to go to New York City with our mobile unit there to collect problems. After we've collected the problems, and these problems is a term that we use, it can be a big problem, small problem, personal problem, social problem, global problem. We cast a very broad net because we want people to have the opportunity to own the question. In this case, at Williams, it was, how does climate change affect you? So we send those problems to think tanks in the so-called developing world. This is Le Chariot. It is a solar-powered mobile tea lounge that we use to travel throughout rural Morocco, asking for help solving American problems. The Moroccans were incredibly generous with their advice and the strategies that they gave us to solve the problems that we were sharing. This is a touchscreen that we brought with us, and it says, please help us, in Arabic, French, and Berber. We then implement those problems. As Chris said, whether they seem practical, impractical, or brilliant, which they often are. Sorry, impractical. Yes, the solutions, which they often are. So, for example, this is the legal waiting zone that we installed along Roosevelt Avenue in Corona, Queens. There was an unconstitutional, 3 times ruled unconstitutional loitering law, and this intervention brings that to light. This is an image from our immigrant promotional campaign, which was also part of the larger commission, the Open Door Commission from the Queens Museum, and it's a series of guerrilla bus ads. We have fixed these posters using magnets to the back of New York City buses.
And actually the bus ads were, this set of bus ads were designed by people who had expressed, I guess, fear or animosity about the number of immigrants coming into their neighborhood. So then it was turning around back to them and asking them to, since a lot of them had come 2 generations ago, to help design these. So these ads were actually the people who had issues helping design ads about the impact, the positive impact that immigrants are having.
Right, thanks so much for adding that, Christopher. So imagine what it might be like to be, say, I don't know, loitering in New York City at some point and seeing these buses with this message circulating around town. The project started in 2006 and includes think tanks from Iran. They are a group of artists in Tehran. Cuba, 3 generations of a family living under the same roof. Ghana, our first think tank, and hence the name of the project, are a group of villagers living in Kokrobite, which is about an hour out of Accra. In Palestine, our think tank is a group of medical students. In India, we have just begun working with this very wonderful group of college students. And this is our Sudanese think tank. They are a group of refugees that are seeking asylum in Israel. We also work with one US-based think tank. It's a group of incarcerated teenage girls. During the course of the project, we've collected hundreds of problems. People really enjoy talking about their problems. I do too. And we've received nearly as many solutions. Let's hear the think tanks talking about them.
Pienso que una de las cosas que más admiro de Estados Unidos, de la cultura de Estados Unidos, que le apuesta muchísimo a la educación, a que sus hijos terminen la educación básica, se vayan a la universidad, porque siento que de una forma mantener el sistema de dominio a nivel mundial. Pero siento que le faltaría la otra parte, la parte humana, en valorar al resto de la gente que habita este mundo.
Y eso yo lo he visto con, por ejemplo, en los Estados Unidos con los afroamericanos, ellos sí respetan a sus viejos, ¿eh? Sí. O sea, su abuela, eso sí lo respetan. Y los latinos lo hacen, y los asiáticos lo hacen. Aquí en Westport el problema es que la mayoría son blancos, y los blancos son a los que va dirigido, yo creo que esto, ¿no?
Vedemo v Westportu neku zatvorenu sredinu ko Vranje recimo i sad oni ne mogu tamo, nisu dobrodošli to. I šta da radimo da zatvorimo Westport?
So now I'm going to take us through a few examples of us putting the think tank solutions into action. Yeah, let me know if volume's too low, too high, etc. This is a house in Westport, Connecticut, which is one of the wealthiest towns in the United States. A problem we kept running into there was lack of diversity. We are all white and wealthy, they complained. The think tank in El Salvador responded that they probably were actually a lot more diverse than they realized. They just weren't counting certain people. Who's fixing your house? Who's tending your yard?
Who's your interventional cardiologist?
They probably don't look like you. And their solution was for us to hire immigrant day laborers to attend Westport social functions, which we did for $15 an hour cash, same as their day laborer work. So, skipping ahead quite a couple years, as Ghana think tanks developed, we've started to realize that it could be used as a tool to create some really unlikely partnerships. And so we've started to expand the scope. This is the main bridge in Mitrovica, which is a violently divided town in former Yugoslavia. The Serb population and the Albanian population in this town are separated from each other by a river and protected from each other by international troops. We applied the Ghana think tank process differently here, asking Serbs and Albanians to solve each other's problems from across that river. And after 10 days of the process, a surprising thing happened. A group of Serbs and Albanians who had not crossed that river between them since the war between them had ended in 1999 came across to the other side to work directly with them for this project. Essentially, they kicked us out of our own project. I remember they asking, "Why are you here? Shouldn't we be talking to them?" And we realized it was a far greater success than anything we'd actually planned to happen in our time there. And so learning to give up control, creating ways to give up control has become a major goal for us. The Mitrovica project taught us that Ghana Think Tank can have a much deeper impact in people's lives when it's a process that's owned by others.
So, when we were invited to work here with the Williams College Museum of Art on a year-long initiative focused on climate change, we approached the project as an exciting venture, an opportunity to modulate it more intensely. How could we fully integrate the Ghana Think Tank process into the Williams systems, institutions, and community, rather than merely offering a product produced by we, the artists, for viewing by you, the Williams community? One major shift in our usual working model was to bring think tanks to the U.S. for an in-depth, real-time exchange with the Williams community members. We brought in 2 think tanks from countries already grappling with the results of climate change. A think tank in Morocco whose farmers had to adapt the ways that they work and the food they grow to deal with rapidly increasing desertification. and a group from Indonesia, members of an activist collective called Life Patch. They also are already grappling with extreme flooding caused by rising sea levels and storms in their capital city, as well as vicious fires causing massive deforestation with an alarming frequency. I know we have them in the United States. Indonesia is experiencing them even more rapidly and often and in unusual seasons. It's even difficult to kind of predict them. With WCMA as the hub, we began working with several institutions at Williams to set up an action team. The action team was composed of students, including members from the Center for Learning in Action, the Zilka Center for Environmental Initiatives. Sarah Jacobson from the Department of Economics was a core member, and Sarah Gardner in Environmental Studies, I have to say it, was a force of nature, pardon my pun. Margot Neely of Neely and Daughters, and several North Adams collaborators as well, particularly from the Root Center. So in addition to this, we created a winter study course whose mission it was to complete the installation at Williams College Museum of Art in the Rotunda, as well as a spring breakout trip to Detroit, where we began to draw connections between the local experience of climate change at Williams and cities across the nation.
Actually, there's a couple people who've worked on this project. Maybe I'll do that thing that always happens where, Sane, could you stand up just for a second? Everyone who, I know I'm doing it. Is this
people
stupid?
can see the action.
Yeah, there, we gotta put the, right? No, you're not gonna do it. All right, never mind. I stopped being that guy. Terrence on it, lots of people. Because this is, Ghana Think Tank's never a normal project. Like if a museum thinks they're getting someone to hang things on the wall and the hardest pain will be figuring out the proper anchor, and then we show up and like, how do we find a woodworker and how do we seal this thing and it's gonna be there for the winter, and then do we have permission to put this here, and people from Indonesia and Morocco are coming here, and Trump just started a ban on all these Muslim countries, and then just taking in ideas that are deliberately from another culture, trying to figure out how you can make them work in your own. You're always ending up in super uncomfortable positions, and we're not really allowed to do our thing. Like, we're trying to take an idea from a very different place. And so anybody who works with Ghana Think Tank becomes uncomfortable at some point. And so it's definitely, I'm super, well, of course, we're always super thankful for anyone who actually sticks with this, because it tests us in ways that we don't even feel like ways we want to be tested or think are worthwhile often. Okay, so with that beginning, this was the hub, is the hub. It's up until June 3rd at WCMA, 4th. June 4th up at Williams College Museum of Art. And this is an exhibition as well as a place where a lot of our meetings took place, where evidence of actions were followed. The centerpiece you can see there is this Moroccan pattern cut from aluminum. And actually when the exhibit closes, we're bringing it down to a long-term project in Detroit, part of a land trust there, and it will become part of a permanent courtyard. This is part of our goal over 10 years of trying to find ways that the exhibition cycles and the changing goals of museums can start to leach, I don't know if that's the right word, into different industries, into different fields, into people's lives in different ways. So this is first time something like this has been possible, where something that started out as a sculpture and an installation is actually becoming a part of someone's home in a long-term urban regeneration project. This was meant, initially it was, since Indonesia and Morocco are both Muslim majority nations, and since our nation, as everyone in this room probably knows, is villainizing Muslims at the moment, this was meant to be a beautiful but also sharp and not quite fitting in with, are these Doric or Ionic columns? Well, basically this Western symbol of old Greek, Roman, etc. I'll stop pretending I know about architecture at this moment. And I thought it would be this severe, just this sharp, angular, futuristic, but beautiful Islamic patterning, kind of jarring and attacking. And we put the big purple bubble, because one of our goals is to try to pop that Williams purple bubble, Williamstown purple bubble as much as we could. And it's that thing there. What was amazing is it actually just, much like the experience with the group from Indonesia, the think tanks from Indonesia and Morocco when they actually came here, although there were a lot of nervousness over the bans, there were phone calls from employers about did we know what we were getting them into. In the end, it was like this, where fit into the rotunda perfectly. We didn't build it specifically for this space, but it did just gel wonderfully. Here's a close-up of some. If anyone's not seen it, come on by WCMA. You've got a month about. And then on the walls, here's a picture of the think tank, the think tank of Sudanese refugees seeking asylum in Israel. We also had the different problems that had been submitted on the wall, as well as a video you'll be seeing soon of different problems that had been collected, video problems. And then also solutions, the different solutions. We had video of the Moroccan and Indonesian think tank talking about different issues, coming up with different solutions. So as you walk through the space, you kind of follow the timeline of what had been going on, seeing people's problems into the solutions and then into the actions.
One thing to add too is that it's an active space for engagement, so there's a lot of opportunity to write, to leave your own problems, to sort of comment on solutions as well, and that's still happening. So if maybe after we're done with the talk you're a little bit shy, but there's something you wanted to say, please do go to the site and leave us a message.
Or like the physical site, not the web one, right? Or that. Yeah. Also, we were trying to think about all the different systems at play with this, the different systems at Williams, the different systems around us, and think about focusing on climate change and this process is something that gets owned by somebody, the person whose neighborhood it's actually landing in. So there's certain things like instead of the wall text under each object saying like who made this and the year and material, etc., we researched the carbon footprint, how much carbon emissions had been produced by that object, and then a couple ideas for ways we could, equivalencies, ways we could mitigate that, or just a way to make it understandable. Actually, as part of we're all contributing in different ways to mitigate the climate emissions from this project. I've given up beef for the year. We'll see after a year if it becomes like a lifelong thing. But when I researched different ways of mitigating, I'll say again, your carbon footprint, that just seemed offsetting. That's that word everyone says. Beef was just amazing to see the ratio of what we put in to get that little burger. And then trying to find every opportunity to implement the solutions. So at the opening, we had this alternative protein sources, a Moroccan solution of finding alternatives for a food that will disappear as climate change worsens. We also had a strict bring your own cup policy for all WCMA Ghana Think Tank events. So if you don't bring your own cup, you don't drink. And what was wonderful was talking with people responsible for cleaning up after that. It was like, I remember I just fold the table and it's done. So yeah, that was some of the ways we're working it all together. And it's your turn again.
Okay. I'm realizing this is actually a tiny bit awkward. Yeah, moving back and forth, yeah. So the action team started by repairing and refitting our old mobile unit. You saw John and me pushing this thing earlier with a new video drop box, a new paint job, fixes on the doors and on the interior as well. So thank you so much to all of you guys for that. And bringing it around Williamstown, North Adams, and the surrounding area, asking the question, how does climate change affect you? Using this big red panic button, people could leave video messages for the think tanks as well. You can really get into it in a video message. Or for people who maybe are a little bit more shy and or want time to think about how they're going to phrase their statement, we also offered people the opportunity to write postcards to the think tanks. One thing that I find really fascinating about this phase of problem collection at the very beginning of each implementation is how it creates a mirroring of sorts. So when you see all the problems together, it's like a portrait in discontent of your community. You can look at them and say, wow, I had no idea that was a problem in my community, or wow, I have that problem too. The other thing that's sort of interesting about this method that I'll call a creative problem finding methodology is that it gives us a way to get beyond sort of the national rhetoric around climate change and down to what it's really doing to people's daily lives.
Climate change affects me because under current projections for water level rise, my high school will be underwater by the end of the next century.
I'm very much aware of the fact that my well could very easily run dry. If
members of this community choose to drive their vehicles to work and to park in parking lots even when they live only a minute or two away.
When you live in a city, that heat really has an effect, especially like on public transportation, will become a lot more unbearable.
Climate change has affected my town because I'm from a town called Rio Rico, which means rich river, and the river has kind of like dried up in the past like 50 years or so.
I think part of the problem is that it doesn't really affect me as a student at Williams, and that doesn't mean that it's not a problem, and that also doesn't mean that it doesn't affect other people a lot more than me. It just means that there are a lot of people in a position where they don't observe it day to day, and so they don't have a huge incentive to have it be on the forefront of their mind.
I live in eastern South Dakota, where the main industry is agriculture, and climate change has affected the planting season, the types of hybrids that we have.
Why do we have sprinklers in a climate where we don't need sprinklers?
So I'm in the beekeeping club, and the bees that we ordered last year died.
Climate change has made the summer so hot, and I can't take the heat. What do you suggest?
What happens to my recyclables after I put them in the trash?
Nobody will cross-country ski ever again, and they'll forget that it ever happened because we won't have the snow here.
My concern about climate change is what it's done to some of the home areas. Like in Louisiana, you have land mass being washed away by water.
Because we have grandchildren. We need this planet in good shape for them and their children.
So the next phase involves sending these problems to the think tanks and asking them to analyze them. This is yet another really interesting sort of opportunity to look at ourselves in a mirror, this time through other people's eyes.
Saya agak bingung isi pertanyaan pertama itu Pak. Saat itu. Mohon guru bahasa Inggris apa ya? Iya, aku udah bingung. Sini pertanyaan pertama.
Iya. Jadi ada kekurangan kubis di Polandia gitu. Dan
di sini cuma dibilang makan malam ala Polandia.
Ya,
mungkin dia bisa di Surabaya. Kalau aku lihat dari ceritanya kan Florida ya. Kalau biasanya musim dingin misalnya kebak salju dan macam-macamnya, ternyata di Florida ini musim dinginnya tidak terlalu dingin. Nah, beberapa tanaman di sini misalnya puding, lobak itu enggak
nggak bisa tumbuh optimal.
Ini kalau di sini disebutkan lobak menjadi lebih kecil dan makin kecil.
Cuman kan tanaman yang tahan terhadap perubahan cuaca nggak bisa lebih ke jadi tanaman pengganti untuk yang kayak kubis lobak atau cabai atau segala macamnya tadi yang terpengaruh sama perubahan suhu. Nah, beberapa kemarin sih setahu aku ketika itu tanaman itu sudah nggak berproduksi baik ataupun petani pasti akan mengusahakan untuk keep gimana caranya.
Ya menurutku bukan suatu ancaman sih besar, karena melihat dari segi kalau itu bukan tanaman pokok. Misal kalau di sini beras lah atau nasi lah, seumpamanya tidak memproduksi beras, jelas itu merupakan ancaman pokok, ancaman utama karena tidak ada beras.
Bayangkan sebuah negara adidaya kuasa Amerika itu aja sudah menurut namanya faktor-faktor ini tadi, mulai makanan tanaman sudah mulai mengkeret kan.
Emang Florida Amerika
ya, anggap aja begitulah.
Ya paling Florida di Amerika lah, karena pakai bahasa Inggris. Sekarang Florida yang Jepang, pasti pakai bahasa Jepang.
Ada sesuatu yang ya buat anomali sih. Anomali ya, bukan anomali kafe tapi sebuah ada anomali tadi. Apa tuh anomali yang dirancang?
Those guys are so smart. Here, next we'll hear from the Moroccan think tank.
بهذا التغير المناخي حيت هو بيسدوا ليه مثلا الميزان ديالو ولا خاصو يخلص الضرائب حيت نحاول شويه نطور من كيفيه التواصل والكومونيكاسيون التواصل عنده مع الناس حيت ماشي اي واحد يقدر يجي يقنعك مثلا بالافكار ديالو شويه يكون شويه مهدن في الهضره مع الناس ولا يحاول حتى هو يقتنع بالافكار ديال الناس ما يجيش يفرض عليك فكرته وهو يقول لك هذه اللي كاينه واخا هو مش بايقه معاك شويه بشويه حيت مثلا انا مقتنعه بالفكره ديالي جيت ندردشها قلتها لي قال لي لا شنو كاين قلت لي هذيك هضرتك كنحترمها غادي يحس بواحد الراحه ومره اخرى نجي عنده شويه بشويه تيولي حتى هو يقدر يقنعه بافكار يعني هذا الشخص يحاول شويه يبدل من الطريقه ديالو هو في يعني بحال كأنه واحد لاسبيس عايش في واحد الظروف وداك لاسبيس مابقاش غادي يقدر كاين الحل الثاني اللي هو الاستيراد ونورمالمون يبدا امبورتيو ولكن ديما غادي يبقى الى عندهم بروبليم ديال الهويه ديالهم انهم هما اللي كينتجوا قيمته في انتاجه اما الا شرينا ما تلاش ولكن انا داكشي علاش زعما تنقول ان راه المجتمع خاصو يعرف ان راه حنا اون شونجمون كنحتاجو الا فهمتك ولكن خاص الانسان يتقبل ان راه ما يمكنش داكشي كنجاوب في 1900 ولا غادي في 1950 ماشي مره كيجيك الحنين ولكن كتقول راه كاينين اكراهات اللي خاصني تعيشنا وياها داكشي اللي كيجيني الشعب خاصو يعرف ان راه ما يمكنش زعما سالوغ ديال باس انهم يرجعوا الانتاجات اللي كانوا عندهم في ليبوك ولكن زعما they have to deal زعما انهم to deal with what they have زعما داكشي اللي عندهم.
One of the things I found really enlightening about these discussions is that the think tanks saw that not only is climate change eroding our physical environment, but also the cultural and social fabric that we share today.
So after this, we set to work trying to figure out ways to implement their solutions. I'll go through a bunch of the problems now. Some, as you can see, seem pretty mundane and personal. But we've learned over the 10 years or so that often these most tiny sounding problems translate the best internationally than something that feels big and important. And we've probably all dealt with waking up the morning after a party at our house. It's a really visceral lump of evidence and usually feel a little crappy at the same time of what we're doing, like just the amount of waste we're able to produce when we have a good time. And so, yeah, this is one of the problems about drinking culture being unsustainable at Williams. And you can say two of the solutions. Indonesia talked about drinking together from the same vessel. That parties there's often this one big shared vessel. I remember I used to live in Fiji, and there was also the one big kava bowl that we'd all drink out of with the one same shell. And there they even said that sometimes there's one plastic bag that's filled with liquor, and you just kind of twist it shut, and the next person drinks from it, and you pass that around.
That was really, that solution brought around this really interesting conversation about how the U.S. in general, I think you can say, is pretty germophobic, and how can we make it so that you can drink out of the same vessel but don't actually have to share saliva, and can we get this one-way valve straws? I mean, we went there, but it was they were like, really? But you guys will share a cigarette, but you won't share a cup? Oh no.
I said share a joint.
They did.
And then, bring your own cup party, which we mentioned earlier. Let's talk about a couple other. So here are the famous cabbages and turnips that keep coming back in this project. I've learned that. So as you saw in the videos, they started by coming up with some pretty maybe expected or solutions that make a lot of sense. Create a list of foods to replace those that will be extinct, find other ways to grow it, find hardier foods that. But you quickly saw that both with Indonesia and Morocco, they landed on the cultural aspect. And this is something I definitely learned through this culture. When I've thought about what we're going to lose because of climate change, this is the first time I realized how much of culture we'll be losing. I mean, the importance of like the rites of passage involved with cross-country skiing or downhill being lost. And then just the fact that we can't cook like grandma's recipe won't work anymore. There is a cultural importance. And then as we started getting into the solutions more, realizing that in order to combat climate change, it also takes a very big cultural shift. And learning this from two cultures that are already dealing with this, for them was more like, well, yeah, this is what you have to do. For us, I guess we're just more popularly starting to get to that precipice where more and more people are realizing this. And that was definitely something I learned from this. Here's another example. I remember one guy came up to me when he saw this in the exhibit and he pointed at this problem. He's like, what about downhill, you elitists? So it's like a little, learning a bit about New England culture. This was, I mean, look at this idea. Use extinction of snow as a reminder to bring back what is already extinct from your culture. If we think about it, there's already things we've given up that aren't forced on us, things that were important to our culture that we've given up because of technology, because of money, because of whatever other decisions we make in our life. And this solution isn't necessarily changing climate, like what's going to happen with the climate, but it is forcing us to consider the impact and the importance of it in ways we might not have otherwise.
Definitely. I think what it's doing is it's asking us to evaluate how our current practices are sort of eroding our opportunities across like sectors, right? So we're considering climate change, but they asked us to think even more broadly at U.S. consumer culture in general.
Actually, this is what we're doing for a lot of today. There are people I won't point at. Up at early, okay. First is the problem about people driving short distances here. And then the solution initially was parking, like taking over parking spots, making it hard for people to drive so that they don't. But then this was augmented with this idea, the Javanese concept of mampir. Javanese is a language spoken in Yogyakarta, which is where the Indonesian think tank is from. And you can see here, what is it? Human life is a stop on the road where we pause to have a drink. Take this literally. Your USA to go culture means that you don't take the time to speak with people. Walk instead of drive so that you can enjoy mampir. And today there was a lot of taking over of parking spaces on Spring Street. Some people here may have seen it, and a couple different activities and actions going on, one of which just talking about mampir and how this in its own right is beneficial to our culture. It can bring something back that has become pretty much extinct in our culture with strangers and with time in between moments that a lot of us have lost. But also it pointed to something that's become a trend when we start getting into rebranding climate change that we'll talk about shortly, where one way forward in this divided country and world that we have now is learning to address issues related to climate change without going to climate change, because that closes the conversation instantly as a term. And here was one great example where we're trying to get people to stop driving for the social reasons as well as the environmental, and making that be something. So regardless of what you think about human impact on climate or about leave me alone in my car, it's my right, there's a completely different angle to get into.
I think that's a really important point about the Ghana think tank process in general, is that it brings everything down to the human scale. So maybe the world isn't going to end tomorrow, but you can't have boiled cabbages with Granny today. And so it creates kind of a point of access that you're already experiencing. Another problem that was shared, this was shared by a student here at Williams. In Florida, you aren't allowed to use the term climate change in any official document. That's a terrible problem. I mean, like, you can't even do or say anything to a politician or amongst yourselves as activists if you can't even call it by name. We got this great solution from the Moroccan think tank, rebrand climate change. We're going to talk about this a lot, so I'm just going to leave it there, and we'll unpack it a little bit later. I can't figure out a way to talk about climate change that would invite people who don't believe in climate change to participate. When I only talk to people who agree with me, nothing changes and my perspective is never challenged. Again, what a tremendous roadblock. What can be done if you can't even begin to address a problem with members of your community? Indonesia's solution was break it into smaller, more direct initiatives. The steps that are taken as real action to decrease the impact of climate change become more important than the formulation of proper terms. Again, bring it down to the human scale. That's you.
Yeah. So now we've been busy, I don't know, past 4 or 5, 6 months, I guess since December, January, anyway, implementing all of these solutions. But I want to take time to just look at these last two in detail related to rebranding climate change, because it did become a point of friction that seemed to encapsulate a lot of what's been going on in the project. And yeah, so I think this is a good way for us to summarize. So remember, Morocco's solution was rebrand climate change. Seems very straightforward. As we asked for more information, this is the explanation we're initially given. If you can't see the king's face on the moon, then you do not love your country. And so starting to understand with that, members of the Morocco think tank started to explain how in the 50s, King Mohammed VI had been deposed to another country, but he was incredibly beloved by many people, and many people said, he is still here, he is still looking over us, even though he was no longer there. And they said, you can see him actually in the moon still looking over us. And everybody in the think tank said they don't believe this, but their grandparents do. I don't know if their parents do, but their grandparents certainly do. And they said that it's a very, 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 I remember 3 varies, terrible thing, even today, to doubt that there was his face on that moon. They don't believe it, but it's incredibly sacrosanct to the point where they can't even bring it up within their own families. So somewhat recently, one way of dealing this was, sounds like the equivalent of like a Saturday Night Live in Morocco. They had a fake talk show on television, and then a man dressed as King Mohammed VI came out and was being interviewed. And one of the questions was, do you really believe the United States was the first country to be on the moon? And they're touching on that, as we know about the Stanley Kubrick conspiracy theories, the faked moon landing, all of that, touching on that whole, is this true or not? And his response was, well, no, of course, because everyone knows Morocco was there first. And I guess that was the joke they're using to try to help us understand what they meant by rebranding climate change. And a connection, then this is part of our job, like, okay, how do we apply this to rebranding climate change? How can we translate this? And one connection, we'll talk about it a lot more, but one connection I've seen is as a way to convince climate deniers without ending the conversation immediately by violating, I mean, basically climate change is a trigger word for a lot of people, and it will end the conversation, put you in a circle where whatever you say is nonsense because you're a climate alarmist. And it's also, I mean, this idea of something like faith and something that is sacrosanct. I mean, a lot of us identify, like we self-identify, it's a tribal signifier, what we believe about climate change. And so to immediately violate that and then think that we can connect with someone is obviously completely misguided. And so this has been a way of we've been trying to find guidance in this strategy.
Right, right. I mean, essentially what they were saying to us is that you are trying to fight faith with fact, and it's like apples and oranges.
There you go.
Okay, so the Indonesian think tank explained to us their solution with a story about their own work around their river project. So the river project was a combination of science, working with young people, and fun, right? So the river in the community was extremely polluted. It was partly polluted by actions of the government. So it was even really difficult to petition politicians for help, right? But it was also polluted because of the daily activities of people living along the river, using the river the way that humans have used rivers forever. And so they were trying to sort of respond now. Like, the thing is that these large macroscopic efforts working with governments and politicians take too long. There were people drinking the water in the river today. So they began by organizing river walks with community members, simply getting together and walking the length of the river, noticing that there's failing plant life, dead animals, the smell in the river shifts back and forth as you move along areas of different degrees of pollution. It also brought people together along this river with a theme of like, let's learn about the river. They began expanding these river walks by collecting water samples and teaching students how to do that as part of science lessons. And then they partnered with a university who was able to do water sampling testing for them, so that then they found out that it was actually not only polluted with toxic chemicals, but also a lot of E. coli. And the next phase of that was to teach people how to make water filters so that the water would be less toxic, more usable and healthy for them, because it wasn't a matter of, leaving. It wasn't a matter of the river suddenly being cleaned. It was about survival today. It was when they were doing the workshop here at WCMA, a local water quality activist said, well, usually we do stuff here, like we start with wanting to fix the river. And Gegar from the Indonesian think tank said, well, that's too slow. We need to deal with this now. And it was a really interesting kind of cultural disconnect, shift in perspective that I found really enlightening, because it's not that you're not doing anything, it's that you're working on a different scale, again, the human scale.
Something else I'd add to that is, in Indonesia, the local government was largely responsible for the pollution in that river, and that was not something that the think tank could come out and publicize. And so by getting children together, doing science projects, learning how to do water sampling and plant sampling, they were able to wrap this up in this kind of happy, naive veneer, and then you'd come and see the results. And then from there was like this slow step. It was a kind of a coping mechanism where they could actually operate without getting slammed down.
Yeah, and actually also a way to kind of cultivate a group of activists, giving people access to action right now.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one concern that's come up a lot in this project is about trivializing concepts of climate change, about it becoming about cabbages or turnips or skiing. One thing that the River Project shows, and a lot of the actions we've gone through, is that it's this tiny thing which may not have an impact, but simply beginning to work on it gives you a sense of agency, but also makes you believe in it. And so that's a vector, I guess I keep saying that lately, a vector that we're focusing on, where it's this action that, even if in its own right it's not making that much of a difference, it is changing someone's thoughts and culture about that. Okay, how are we applying these lessons? I'll talk about one approach we're taking now. There's basically the Moroccan side of rebranding climate change, and the Indonesian side, which is more, I'm talking about as thin slicing, meaning forget climate change, talk about the impacts of climate change and focus on that. And so what we've been doing is trying to figure out, initially we've broken 4 categories that are popularly climate deniers or skeptics or whatever term you like to use for it. And so we've been focusing on pro-life, border security, free market, and the macho alt-right. And what we've been trying to do is put together, taking the arguments of those different communities that support their own projects, I guess I could say, or identities, and applying them to climate change, seeing how they can go. As you'll see, there's huge awkwardness and difficulty in that we're taking arguments that we don't believe in and applying them to support something we do care about and believe in. So here you can see, as one action team member put it, this really concisely, the trick is to use their political views, not your own, to make your point. So this pro-life angle has been trying to align preservation of the earth with preservation of life. You can see here, pollution harms the unborn as one vector into that. And also just this sense of pollution itself. And for part of this, our assignments basically we gave ourselves were listen to only media from center right, climate denial, et cetera, talk with anybody we can find who does not believe climate change is human caused, and starting to realize nobody wants to live in a polluted place. Everybody wants it to be a clean, safe, and beautiful area. So you can, in that case, get rid of the concept of climate change and just talk about preventing pollution. And that's a way to get around these ideological issues. Actually, I prefer the word tribalism, and get into specific action that people can take. What else do we want to say about this? When it comes to climate change, choose life. What was the quote? Our environment is the womb of all life. By acting now against climate change, we choose life for generations to come. And I should point out one concern with, here, I guess I'll go to this. How do we talk about something people believe doesn't exist? Me as mom was Christian, dad was Jewish. We did everything sort of as a Hallmark holiday, and I'm not even agnostic. I'm probably atheist, but this is the closest, like, climate change I've realized, and probably art is like the closest to faith I've got. And there's no way, both my parents are scientists, there's no way like we can actually prove it to statistical significance, the impacts of anything that's recognizable by an individual human being in their day-to-day life. So there is faith in climate change, and kind of trying to make those alignments has been a way. We don't need proof. That's why it's called faith. Climate change is faith, religion, believing in something hard or impossible to prove. Also talk about faith and farming as stewardship of God's creation. I don't know if you can read this from there, but it says what?
The Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate and keep it. Genesis 2:15.
So again, this is liberals, progressives, trying to teach other progressives how can we talk to people who believe very differently than us about climate change. And obviously that's maybe at this stage we're in the training of trainers phase, and from there we actually reach out to the eventual target audience. Then another angle was looking at national security, border security. What are the arguments being used there? How can that be aligned with climate change? Important thing to note about here is that for all of human history, strongest nations have been those that use knowledge of their environments to defend themselves and ensure that their citizens had secure food and water. And by ignoring the realities of our changing climate, we're weakening our most basic line of defense. The crisis in Syria is a clear illustration of this reality. The uprising there broke out amidst the greatest drought in Syrian history, which caused 1.5 million failing farmers to flee to Syria's overpopulated cities. And experts concur now that high levels of food and water insecurity in agricultural areas was one of the main triggers of the conflict. And it's well established that climate change is to blame for the intensity of this drought. I guess I'll look at that quote from James Mattis. Climate change is impacting stability in areas of the world where our troops are operating today. Energy security, not well, you can read all the others. I guess all I'd say about that one there is, I don't know much about the military. I maybe have one or two friends who've been through it. Seeing that argument makes me believe that now, like, thinking about climate change is up there in the Pentagon as one of the vectors that they need to analyze as they're thinking strategically about going forward. And when I think about the amount of money spent on defense, and I think about how people very, very, very different than me are involved in that, it feels like at least this is an entrance. This shows us there's hope for these aspects to be involved in that incredibly powerful part of our government.
Can I add something actually?
Yeah.
Like, so as I'm looking at these buttons again, like one of the things I myself, I still have sort of like visceral reactions to the language because it's like the bad guy's language, you know, and I think that that's one of the reasons why this particular solution in the form of these buttons is so interesting and goes right to the core of the problem as it was stated. So not only is it that this person can't connect with people who don't believe in climate change, but they also can't even begin a conversation that also stimulates and potentially like opens the way that they see the mind of the other. And so what I really love about this is this gap between what I think and what I think someone else thinks embedded in this language and in these buttons. It challenges me to find a way to connect, despite the fact that I want to resist, I want to shut it down, you know, and so that's sort of the source of the edginess of these, and I think that's why they're rather brilliant, really.
And yeah. I mean, there's the issue of by taking something you don't believe in and pushing it forward, we're also pushing forward these beliefs that are counter to ours. So I don't know if I actually had not the most incendiary is in there, but I mean, things that will make people fear that we need to secure our borders against immigrants. There can be undertones across that's happening. I mean, of course, pro-life, pro-choice, and then, I mean, I don't believe in like the magical thinking of free market, yet that feels like that's a way to, if you can talk about climate change according to free market, there's a whole new population that's coming on board. So I guess these at this phase are starting to figure out how can we speak to people who don't believe like us, as opposed to like completely finished, polished concepts. That's a lot of what we were doing on the street today, and actually tomorrow at 11 in the room, I keep forgetting the name of, the Manton Reading Room. There will be, we'll be doing a workshop at 11 o'clock, a climate change rebranding workshop. We'll have some brainstorming, some activities, and designing buttons. It's a lot of what we were doing, bouncing off of what we had so far, getting visceral reactions to them, and coming up with alternatives. There's also a site, rebrandclimatechange.org or revisitclimatechange.org. We're both still, both of them exist at this point, which is the beginning of a launch of a website to keep this initiative going. I guess the quick summary of this, because we should finish up. We got like just a tiny little bit left. There's actually a group called Republican, EN, also known as Echo Right, who are Bob Inglis, who is South Carolina representative, was actually convinced by his children that climate change is human caused, and is now pushing a movement to find free market solutions to climate change. One argument he talks about is this, he says, okay, what's the solution? Eliminate all subsidies for all fuels, make all fuels fully accountable for all of the costs they bring upon society. Figure a way to make it in our trading partners' interest to join us on a level playing field where all products bear all of their climate costs. No more socializing soot, no more passing on climate costs to future generations. Okay, we can read that for a second. Okay, and Carmen's gonna take it out.
So this is the last one we're going to share with you guys today. Yeah, as weather gets more unpredictable, I find it harder to find people willing to sit next to me outside. I hate sitting outside by myself. This was submitted by a very dear 90-year-old woman here in Williamstown. And the Moroccan think tank says, well, she can move to Morocco. We did think at one point of maybe getting together a pool of money to send her to Morocco, but then Moroccan think tank came up with something a little bit more interesting. And so it was a funny solution, but the Moroccan think tank went on to say, well, you guys have all these weird ways of interacting. You don't have to be face-to-face. You can use your social media and your apps like Tinder. One of the Moroccan think tank members is a cartographer, so she travels all over the world and oftentimes doesn't know anybody at all. And so she'll use Tinder to find friends to go out and have drinks with. She said, I don't know why, like you are assuming, why don't you just have her get on Tinder? And it was interesting. We are going to do this on June 6th. Chris and I will be leading the workshop. There will be a photographer on site so that people can make a pretty picture for their profile. So if you guys are interested, come on. It's all of the, what? Not interested? Did somebody say? But so one thing that I thought was kind of came out of this is as soon as we started talking to community members about how and where we might implement a solution like this, just the incredible paternalism around the elderly in this country. Oh, they won't be interested in that. No. Everybody's not going to. And we know that it's entirely to the opposite. So opened the proverbial can of worms again. We'll report back on this after the fact. Thank you very much.
Just the 11 o'clock reminder. And remember, 11 o'clock tomorrow, Manton. And now I think anybody have questions or advice at this stage would be great.
We're gonna use resources wisely here and share the microphones. Very quickly, because I want to open this up for questions. Much of the practice, overtly or explicitly or implicitly, it's about language. not just the problems of language, the problems of translation, the actual physical aspects of language. Is this a conscious decision? I mean, you're basically communicating. You're basically doing what's correspondence in so many of these cases, and you're organizing these gatherings. But how has, not just the problems of translation, but how are the complexities of, of different meanings, as it were, of different reference, different sort of semantics, how does that sort of engage what you're doing? Does it make sense? I mean, it's not just a case of a sort of a Google Translate thing. I mean, there's the resonances that all these concepts have.
I think that's a really good question, and that's an absolutely essential aspect of the Ghana think tank process, is that we have to misunderstand ourselves for a good long time and kind of hammer out what we're actually trying to say, what we actually mean in order to get to something real.
That answer it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I guess I have a couple of questions. I'm trying to think which to ask first, but I guess the first one I want to ask has to do, I mean, I really appreciate the sort of brilliance of the symbolic reversal of this paternalistic relationship of, development aid, and it's just brilliant. But I wonder also about the sort of structural economic inequities that I imagine, I mean, you must have thought about this sort of the fact that there's some kind of parallelism with outsourcing economies or with exploitative kind of relationships between the first world and the third world. I mean, I'm sure this comes up, and I wonder if you can talk about it a little bit.
Maybe one story that reflects on that was when we were in Westport, Connecticut, and we're collecting problems. The El Salvador think tank which is a radical rural radio station. They were getting death threats at that time, and they were asking us to do a letter writing campaign, which we were doing. I'm not sure how that helps, but they felt it was important. But we had this question of when we had a problem like the number of golf courses in our community has lots of pesticides and herbicides, and so the runoff is causing cancer. And a serious end result, but just the serious question of, can we actually send these problems to our El Salvador think tank from hedge fund operators complaining about too many golf courses and not enough non-white people for them to feel like they're diverse in their neighborhood? But I guess two important rules is that we're not allowed to play the victim game. We always have to make sure that we're in the place of looking to someone for help. And it's definitely like not shape-shifting, but role play of like, okay, we have to keep feel sorry for anyone no matter what's going on. It's got to be asking for them to help us and always putting them up as a hire. And so we sent them out, and I remember we got this was back when we were actually getting video, little tapes, those little DV tapes, putting in the El Salvador tape and watching it, and it started out with them shaking their heads and like, oh, Westport has such serious problems. And we're like, oh God, here goes like 2 hours of getting torn up. And they're like, your grandparents don't live in the same home with your grandchildren? No wonder your culture is so fucked up. I mean, how is anybody supposed to learn from anyone? And went on to like 2 hours of feeling incredibly sorry for a town full of Westport, Connecticut hedge fund operators. So on that personal level, I mean, we're very careful to check ourselves. I mean, it's ingrained. This project came about as a way to start checking ourselves because we were part of an industry that we saw what the assumptions it was based on, but it constantly takes that rechecking. I mean, all I could say on like a more tangible level is all the think tanks are paid, and we've oscillated between everyone getting a flat fee and asking each think tank like, okay, what's a fair day's wage for each session? Because even if you're only talking for 2 hours, you probably missed a day of work, and that's how we set there. And the reason we've been oscillating is $200 means something very different in Ghana than it does in Serbia, and trying to figure out that.
The other thing I'd like to add to that is that, yeah, absolutely. This is not art from on high. It's not participation from on high. We're not special because we are working in an art context. We're implicated at every stage of the phase of the process, and that gives us something to think about. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah. So. Yeah, because I mean, there is a sort of, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking about social relationships even within the same country where there's a kind of learned helplessness that, you need someone else to do your work for you, right? So so that there could be this sort of sense of inferiority on the part of the person who's actually in the superior position, right? So, I mean, I think it's really interesting how that played out in the El Salvador example. That's great. The other question I had is sort of related, but just about the rebranding climate change, whether the Moroccan think tank has actually looked at the specific slogans and things that you came up with and whether they have a reaction to them.
I mean, beyond like Instagram hearts, no, we 2 nights ago making those buttons. Everything's an ongoing process. So basically, we've gotten some Instagram comments. That's the level we are. And of course, I mean, to think how far we've drifted from the moon, King Mohammed VI on the moon, to this. There's clearly, I think you mentioned mistranslations and translations. We started thinking out this project thinking we could be robots and we'd take solution from other culture, implement in our own. Don't let your own ethics get involved. Don't because that's pushing your own culture in it. Because it's generally not really about solving problems so much as experiencing another culture kind of forced into your own, but also about something that you expressed as a problem. So it actually matters to you, and then you're trying to make it fit, and it doesn't, or sometimes it does. And actually solving problems is often like a surprising occurrence. Yes, I don't even remember where I was going with that, but mistranslations.
Yeah. The other thing to add is that the buttons are all pretty new. So I think after tomorrow's action, we'll have more information about how they actually floated, like how they worked or didn't work. And so then at some point after that, we'll have a full debrief with the Moroccans and the Indonesians, and then we'll be able to report back. There'll be additional information online and opportunities to kind of check in and see what did they think? How did it go?
Yeah, that's an important point. We always do detailed debriefs with the think tanks, and it's not like every solution we do, the think tank's like, great job. I mean, it's just, or that the videos come back as, we really loved what you gave us. There's a lot of anger and just frustration. Well, more frustration than anger, I guess we usually encounter. We've had and I forgot the other thing. Okay.
It was so impressive how obviously much more the think tanks knew about U.S. culture than most Americans know about their culture, right? Yeah.
I was to say just tomorrow at 11 o'clock, I keep plugging this, but that's where we can get the feedback in like a small place so we can and then that gives us our first real auditing of this process, the branding process to the think tanks again. All right, shut up.
Questions? We've got just a little bit of time.
And that you still are so kind of uncertain about or made uncomfortable with. So this may come across as like a gotcha question, but I don't mean it that way at all. So just, fair warning. It seems like the question of trying to get people to recognize the problem of climate change is like step one, but the terms on which you get that recognition also determine the kinds of solutions that those people might propose, and which might not be solutions that you can endorse or feel at all comfortable with at all. So like the military is a great example. Like they've been really one of the forefront agencies in the federal government that wants to have climate change be core to their mission of keeping U.S. military global primacy. So I was wondering if you can anticipate like where this project might be going, because those visions of a just, sustainable future are really going to look different, even if you manage to persuade people that, yes, they need to care about it.
Well, just being very honest that's definitely come up, and that's sort of what I was referring to, is that gap and like working so closely with the bad guy, right? Like I am and super uncomfortable about that, but we just don't know yet. Like we haven't even shared them with a larger community. It's been very small groups of people, and so we need to sort of check. We don't know what the conversations are going to be like yet. I just don't know.
I don't know. Let's think. I mean, I guess I'm thinking as I talk, which is a terrible idea. But here goes. Okay, so we're talking. What are the different things we're talking about, pro-life, free market, and, well, the three we actually showed because the alt-right, border security, and the alt-right we didn't even show because our attempts at that were just so glaringly horrible that they didn't need to be seen by any other people. But if you look at the Instagram, you can see those early mistakes. That's super important. Basically, you're talking about foundations that we lay out are almost more, actually my mom, who's right there, told me once it's not as important how big the step you take as the direction that the step is. And so what you're bringing up is, if our first step is what's a military solution to climate change, then we've already put the power in a place that I'll make an assumption here that not so many of us want regarding climate change. But I guess for me, what it's really about is, how do I talk to all those people in this country that I clearly don't understand and that we clearly don't match? And I guess what Moroccan Think Tank was saying, if you can nod and listen and not try to convince. So maybe one gulf that's happening here is seeing this as the rebranding. I've had issues with the word rebranding. I'm thinking rethinking is better as it's a marketing rebranding thing. Whereas for me, it's how do we all in this room figure out to actually talk with someone who we do not agree with without trying to convince them, and actually meet them on their own terms and try to find from there. So maybe you were sending the wrong message with rebranding, but I guess the scale at which it is I'm finding my buddy who was in the Marines, and that's the next step. And then who does he know? And do they meet at the VFW every third Friday of the month? And that's the level we're working towards. And at every step, there's auditing that's going on. And then fortunately, we get questions like these that help us audit ourselves as well.
Yeah, and actually, I'll just sort of kind of add even more to that, is that again, no art from on high. A lot of the issues and dynamics that we're addressing externally also kind of happen internally. For example, I'm really not interested in talking to those people. I think that it's a totally valid activist perspective to say, well, I want to spend all of my limited energy and resources in organizing and bolstering the efforts of people who validate my worldview, or who validate, in my personal case, my human rights. So that's one perspective. We go back and forth. It could be that the reactions to the people that we share this with is well, that's really not. I have this other thing that I need to take care of. But to try to kind of imagine that in advance creates, for me personally, a risk of me trying to control that dynamic and not really let the Ghana Think Tank process unfold naturally. And it's been very fruitful in the past. So it's difficult sometimes to hang in there and have faith, but it's part of kind of what we have to do to make it work.
And the big issue none of us have mentioned is that if the goal is implementing what the think tank said to do, whether it works or not and destroys our entire climate is besides the point of this entire thing. And obviously, we're doing a huge project in Detroit where we can't ignore that. And the ethics of our action have completely, we're still able to implement the solution as is, but the method it's happening took 3 years of working with everybody in the neighborhood to get to, as opposed to we're trying to do what Morocco said. So yeah, that's I remember once I had a nightmare that the solution was to set off a bomb. And I remember we just set off the timer and we ran back to the van and we were about to drive away. And we're like, wait, what are we doing? This is insane. We can't do it just because they told us to do it. And fortunately, that's when I woke up. I don't know. So that's a very extreme and fancy way to say that there's an issue that could come where we bring this all back to the think tanks. And where's the power dynamic stop? Where do we say, no, we think that's bad, and where do we keep? So that's a whole nother level of I don't know, which is probably pretty unsatisfying.
Yeah, and just to be totally clear, that was a nightmare in Chris's head. We never ever did that.
Ecological subconscious.
Right.
Other questions? Julian?
You're committed to creating ways of control. And part of me initially, before Sarah's question, was just going to ask to hear a bit more about that. But the more you talk, it seems like part of the praxis is a highly controlled giving up of control, which entails a huge amount of risk. And I'm wondering what you see the product are sort of, I mean, are they the cultivation of access points, to use your own phrase? Because it seems like you don't know what's going to happen, and that's part of the...
Yeah, absolutely. The cultivation of access points is essential. What I like to say about this project is that, like, what's really challenging about Ghana Think Tank is that we need a lot of partners. But what's really exciting about the Ghana Think Tank is that we need a lot of partners. This is kind of the axis of an AXIS as opposed to ACCESS. Of the process itself. Like, we need to create a way that people can own it, have a sense of agency, because we don't have the solutions. And we are working, in a sense, from without most of the communities that we execute a project in. So a project isn't simply ever site-specific. It's also context-specific because of the degree of agency and the lack of control that we have when we work with the participants.
And also, it's important to think about, we all came to this project from different angles. We never agree on anything. We'll convince each other of the other point of view. I came to this project initially as a self-punitive project. It was, I want to show my culture what it's like to have another culture impose their goodwill on you. And like, is this working or not? Don't give a fuck. Like, this is what Ghana said. Over the years, it's been over a decade now, we've ended up in places where that simplistic power dynamic isn't being flipped anymore. I'm obviously in Mitrovica, Corona, Queens, where so many people we were talking to were either third-generation Italians or people from Ecuador and Mexico who weren't here legally. And so to be imposing, to be like some artist from anyway, you see that the power to end in Detroit is a huge, where saying developing the first world doesn't sound so clever anymore, and there's just issues with the concept at its core. So I don't know. So that's another way to kind of talk about the question that you've asked us.
Yeah, it strikes me that a lot of the various projects are about conversation, and so the think tank format itself is about conversation, and a lot of times the results seem to be about facilitating conversations. Like, especially with the rebranding project, it's about like how to have conversations in it, and that seems really valuable and really powerful. But I wonder whether there have been solutions that have come from the think tanks that have been more about like, go out and protest, or like contest power, or like do something more confrontational, if that's ever come.
Yeah, do you want to start? Sure. Can you go? Okay. Yeah, like we've gotten orders to make immigrant promotional campaigns. I don't think we showed that documentation. Yeah, we did with the bus, yeah. Or collect funny, dirty stories from old people, put them on MP3 players and play them for young people as a response to this Welsh problem that the elderly were treated like a burden to society. The Iranian think tank said, oh, that's because young people don't think they have it in common with old people. Do this, and really one of my favorite solutions, really beautiful, like when someone listens to that, like that gravelly voice, like having a really great naughty time, that generation gets collapse. It's kind of magic, right? But dialogue is always still kind of the foundation. We have to connect and start sharing ideas for anything to be generated.
I guess some other examples along the lines of what Carmen was bringing up. I remember a think tank solution we were working with a think tank of incarcerated boys in the New York penal system, I won't say prison system, like 14 to 16. And then when they were privatized, they wouldn't work with us anymore. But one of their solutions, I can't even remember the problem anymore, was that we needed to go to police and ask what's the difference between the real world and the cops world. So that was, one related to that. We've had really straightforward things like
the problem for that was that was about the problem was about racial profiling and how police were stopping young Black and Latino males on the streets of Corona.
Right. I'm afraid. Yeah, that we're out of town.
No, but Christopher and Carmen will be back tomorrow. Thanks again, but we want to see all of you again, hopefully at 9 o'clock tomorrow in the auditorium, where more of our discussions will continue. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for coming in again. Thank you to Ghana Think Tank.